Hello and welcome to our video on Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This classic novel has been beloved by readers for generations, and today we'll be giving you a brief summary of the story. This novel is a classic coming-of-age story that explores themes of love, morality, and personal growth. Let's dive in. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is a classic novel first published in 1847. Set in 19th century England, the novel follows the life of Jane Eyre, a young orphan who faces adversity, prejudice, and social constraints while seeking love, independence, and self-fulfillment. The novel is often regarded as a proto-feminist work, as it explores themes such as gender roles, social class, and the importance of education for women. Told from Jane's perspective, the story takes readers on a journey through her difficult childhood, her experiences at the harsh Lowood School, her time as a governess at Thornfield Hall, and her relationships with the enigmatic Mr. Rochester, her employer, and other characters. Jane Eyre combines elements of Gothic fiction, romance, and Bildungsroman, chronicling Jane's moral and spiritual development. The novel has been widely acclaimed for its character depth, psychological complexity, and portrayal of the protagonist's inner struggles, making it a timeless piece of literature that continues to captivate readers to this day. The novel begins with Jane Eyre as a young orphan who is raised by her cruel aunt and sent to a boarding school. However, she eventually becomes a governess at Thornfield Hall, where she falls in love with her employer, Mr. Rochester. There, she is mistreated by the headmaster, but eventually becomes a teacher. After leaving the school, she takes a job as a governess at Thornfield Hall, where she falls in love with her employer, Mr. Rochester. Their relationship is complicated by Mr. Rochester's dark past and the mysterious figure of his mad wife, who is locked in the attic. Despite their obstacles, Jane and Mr. Rochester plan to marry, but on their wedding day, it is revealed that Mr. Rochester is already married to the madwoman in the attic. Heartbroken, Jane runs away and eventually ends up at the doorstep of St. John Rivers, her distant cousin. He proposes marriage to her, but she declines and decides to return to Thornfield Hall. Jane and Mr. Rochester reconcile and eventually marry, leading to a happy ending. Their relationship is complicated by Mr. Rochester's dark past and a mysterious figure known as the madwoman in the attic. Despite their obstacles, Jane and Mr. Rochester plan to marry, but on their wedding day, it is revealed that Mr. Rochester is already married to the madwoman in the attic. Heartbroken, Jane runs away and eventually ends up at the doorstep of St. John Rivers, her distant cousin. He proposes marriage to her, but she declines and returns to Thornfield Hall to find it burned to the ground and Mr. Rochester blinded and crippled in the fire set by his mad wife. Jane and Mr. Rochester reconcile and eventually marry, leading to a happy ending. Life of Jane at Lowood School. At Lowood School, Jane Eyre experiences a harsh and challenging environment. The girls suffer from cold, hunger, and poor living conditions, which leads to a typhus epidemic. Despite these hardships, Jane finds solace in her friendship with Helen Burns, an intelligent and kind girl who teaches her about endurance, forgiveness, and the importance of maintaining one's dignity. Under the guidance of Miss Temple, the school's kind superintendent, Jane also develops a passion for learning and hones her skills in drawing, languages, and other subjects. Jane continues her education and eventually becomes a teacher at the school. After spending 6 years as a student and 2 years as a teacher, she decides to leave Lowood to seek new opportunities, ultimately securing a position as a governess at Thornfield Hall. At Thornfield Hall, Jane Eyre begins a new chapter in her life as a governess to a young French girl named Adele Varens. She is employed by the estate's owner, Mr. Edward Rochester, a wealthy and enigmatic man with a mysterious past. Jane finds herself drawn to him despite his sometimes brusque demeanor. During her time at Thornfield, Jane forms a close bond with Adele and develops a friendship with the housekeeper, Mrs. Fairfax. As Jane and Mr. Rochester's relationship deepens, they eventually confess their love for each other and become engaged. However, on their wedding day, it is revealed that Mr. Rochester is already married to Bertha Mason, a mentally ill woman who has been secretly confined in the attic of Thornfield Hall. Devastated by this revelation, Jane decides to leave Thornfield, embarking on a new journey to find her own path and independence. Falling in love with Mr. Rochester. The love story between Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester unfolds gradually throughout the novel. Initially, their relationship is marked by Jane's curiosity about her enigmatic employer and Mr. Rochester's appreciation for her intelligence and strong-willed nature. Despite their differences in age, social status, and experience, they engage in deep, meaningful conversations and challenge each other intellectually. As Jane spends more time at Thornfield Hall, their connection deepens, and both characters begin to develop romantic feelings for one another. Mr. Rochester often tests Jane's emotions by feigning a potential engagement to the wealthy and sophisticated Blanche Ingram. However, his true feelings for Jane become more evident when he expresses his admiration and love for her sincerity, moral integrity, and strength of character. After a series of mysterious events at Thornfield, Mr. Rochester proposes to Jane, and she accepts. Their happiness is short-lived, though, as their wedding is interrupted by the revelation of Mr. Rochester's existing marriage to Bertha Mason. Despite their love for each other, Jane's principles and desire for independence compel her to leave Thornfield Hall. Ultimately, after much growth and personal development, Jane and Mr. Rochester reunite when she learns of the tragic events that have unfolded at Thornfield. With Bertha gone and Mr. Rochester now blind and in need of support, they marry and find happiness together, overcoming the obstacles that once stood in the way of their love. Their relationship exemplifies the novel's themes of love, trust, and the triumph of morality and integrity over societal expectations. Return to Thornfield and reunion with Mr. Rochester. After some time away from Thornfield Hall and a period of personal growth, Jane feels an overwhelming urge to return and reunite with Mr. Rochester. Guided by a mysterious, supernatural call from Mr. Rochester, she decides to make her way back to the estate. Upon arriving at Thornfield Hall, Jane discovers that the mansion has been burned to the ground as a result of Bertha Mason's actions. Jane then learns that Mr. Rochester is living at a nearby property called Ferndean. When she finally reunites with him, she finds a changed man, physically weakened, emotionally vulnerable, and deeply remorseful for his past actions. Despite his injuries, Jane's love for Mr. Rochester remains steadfast, and she chooses to stay with him, providing care, support, and companionship. Eventually, Jane and Mr. Rochester marry, finding happiness and fulfillment together. Mr. Rochester's past transgressions and the obstacles they faced are no longer barriers to their love, allowing them to build a life founded on trust, mutual respect, and shared values. Jane Eyre is a timeless classic that explores universal themes of love, identity, and morality. It is a story of personal growth and perseverance that has resonated with readers for over a century. If you haven't read this novel yet, we highly recommend that you do. Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more book summaries and reviews.